Hey everyone. So, unfortunately, the world this week has been rather horrible. Between the news about Russia and Ukraine, as well as many other things, I'm sure looking at the news has been particularly difficult for you as it has been for me. But for me personally, I have been particularly stressed about news specifically surrounding the treatment of the LGBTQ and more specifically the transgender communities that have been targeted in the states of Texas and Florida this week. As I'll be discussing in just a moment, the news there has been particularly hard, especially as a transgender person. Despite the fact that I don't live in Texas or Florida, whenever something like this happens, whenever events like I'll be discussing in just a moment occur that target the transgender community, either in the United States, the UK, or around the world, it's sadly a reminder of how precarious transgender rights and safety constantly is. I remember, for example, the news when the transgender military ban came down when President Trump announced that, or the horror transphobia being platformed by the BBC, as I've discussed in numerous other videos elsewhere on this channel. Even though they weren't happening to me in my direct locality, they still hit me hard. Because often, and I think many LGBTQ and transgender people feel this, the community hurts together. And it's truly scary and difficult to see this news. Even further, though, my heart goes out to those affected by this news. And even more so, it has made me want to do what I think I do best, to use my channel and my videos to explain, break down, and discuss these issues in order to educate others about them. It's what I love to do on this channel. Well, love is the wrong word, but at least I feel honored to be able to do with this channel. Yet one of the most insidious parts of these attacks is how they constantly force people to use our energy to respond to them on their timetable, regardless of our own emotional and physical energy and lives that we have to lead. And currently I am already stressed out and overworked and anxious due to numerous work and personal factors right now that I won't get into. But while I've been working on that, I've just felt nothing but this news from Texas, and it's hit me particularly hard as a result just due to the complication of factors. And sadly, because of all that, I haven't had the emotional, physical time or energy due to the amount of work that I have on my plate right now these past couple days to sit down and write a whole video about this news in Texas, despite my desperate, heart-wrenching desire to do so. But I wanted to get my thoughts out there, so I recently spoke about what is happening in Florida and Texas in a recent live stream of mine, and I wanted to share that clip with you, because I feel I just need to talk about these things that are happening that are hurting and harming the trans community. And as I said, it's part of the intention of these attacks, to waste the energy of those fighting back against these events and narratives, to wear us out, to wear us thin, to demoralize and burn us out. Something I've also spoken about in another video. So, with all that said, I want to apologize for the fact that this video addressing this topic in Texas and Florida is less polished than usual, but it's currently what I have the energy for, and it's one that I think is important and need to get out. But I do believe I articulate everything well in the video. That the reason that I'm not doing that is that I'm currently working on other important stuff, work that will continue to fight transphobic attacks such as these, but will also hopefully fulfill my own creative and personal energy too, and also work to not just define myself by the harm done to the trans community or solely my identity, or work on the timetables of people working to attack the most marginalized. And I think that that's important too, by the way, to remember to find joy and energy, not just constantly push back against these things, to refill ourselves as best we can while we're also trying to do the work. And on that one final note, if after watching this video you wish to help in these situations in Texas and Florida, more information as well as tangential information based on like misinformation about the trans community and stuff is linked down below, as well as links to donate money if you are able and willing to do so to organizations trying to help in these situations. Also, don't forget subscribe, like, comments, Patreon help, because that's help pays my bills and all that stuff. But beyond that, without further ado, thank you so much. And here is the clip. Let's talk quickly about Texas. I'm going to try and make it really brief, just so people are up to date about what's going on and the harm that is being enacted there. So we talked about this several months ago, that there was this push by the Texas legislature to try to outlaw, I believe there was actually a law, I'll have to look into the specifics of it. They tried to pass a law that would outlaw trans-affirming care for trans children, namely the use of puberty blockers for trans kids. puberty blockers often being drugs given to kids going into puberty, not like little children, but going into puberty, who just to pause their puberty and give them time in order to figure out what they wish to do in terms of whether they wish to go through a puberty that would sort of align with how their body would have them go through a puberty, or if they wish to go on hormones. Because both versions, whether it be going on hormones to maybe change, like I did with taking estrogen to, go through that sort of puberty, or going through a regular puberty, does cause irreversible changes to one's body. As much as I am very proud of where I am in my transition and all the choices that I made in my life, and I wouldn't change really anything about it, going through a puberty that aligned with my my biology, to use biology as a term, which I know is a heated term, but aligned with what I went through normally, it did cause different changes. My voice deepened, my muscle mass, sort of had its own things. My bones grew to different lengths, things like that. So there was a move by the Texas legislature to try to vilify these drugs that were safe for children. And also, by the way, it should be mentioned that these drugs are often given to kids for other reasons outside of trans context, and it was not seen as child abuse or harmful in those contexts. But the move was sort of saying that this was child abuse. And it fits in with this whole concept that many anti-trans movements, mostly right-wing movements and TERF movements as well, try to paint trans people as child abusers. I mean, I don't want to harp too much on Matt Walsh because, I will harp on Matt Walsh, but I don't want to just use him specifically, but just because he's top of mind, and I did a whole video on him recently. You can go watch his videos, and you can constantly see refrains of whenever he talks about trans people, he will constantly relate trans people to child abusers.
I am accusing you and your fellow propagandists of trying to heavily influence children with falsehoods, distortion, lies, and other forms of insanity that they, the children, do not have the mental capacity to sort through. So indoctrination does not often involve physical force, because you cannot physically force someone to believe something. Belief requires mental assent, not physical assent. But you can coerce and trick people into believing things, and when they're children, that's very easy to do, as you know from experience.
Because supposedly we're forcing these puberty blockers upon kids, but also they tangentially try to say that that trans people are trying to force irreversible surgeries, irreversible damages onto children. This is the same sort of rhetoric that TERFs often use. You can see it in Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damages, her narrative of this whole idea that rapid onset gender dysphoria is hitting children and they want to be trans because they think it's cool, because social media influencers like myself are trying to trick kids into being trans, and then they're going to get surgeries and they're going to change their bodies without any oversight by doctors or things like that.
Concluded that peer influence and social media influence had a lot to do with this trans teen phenomenon. After all, based on parent reports, none of these girls had exhibited symptoms of gender dysphoria at the age that it typically first presents, early childhood. YouTube, Reddit, Tumblr, TikTok, and Instagram all host popular social media influencers, today's version of Hollywood stars, who insist that if you feel uncomfortable in your body, you're probably trans. Many promise that if you start a course of testosterone, all of your problems will go away. There's every reason to believe that these girls are experiencing real psychological pain. Rates of anxiety, depression, and instances of self-harm are all at record levels for this generation. A quick fix becomes very tempting. So it doesn't take much, a YouTube video, a friend's suggestion, to get a troubled girl to buy into the fantasy that gender transition is the answer. Unfortunately for these girls who do not have typical gender dysphoria, gender transition rarely offers relief. And it's a catastrophic mistake for psychologists, educators, and the medical establishment to rush these teens towards a solution that will almost certainly harm rather than heal. Because here's what's not in dispute. Unnecessary medical gender transition causes irreversible damage, high risk of infertility, sexual dysfunction, and the creation of a permanent medical patient. Tragically, we've made it far too easy for kids to take this path, long before they're ready psychologically or emotionally to make such a life-altering decision. Testosterone is easily obtained by today's teens. In Oregon, a 15-year-old can walk into a gender clinic. Yes, there are now gender clinics all over the country, and walk out the same day with a prescription for testosterone without her parents' permission. 16-year-old girl.
That is not the case by any means. The only thing that most trans people would call for, and I'm sure there's exceptions that people can find somewhere, a bad doc, because, trans affirming care sadly is not as, explored and well known and documented as it should be. But in 90%, 95%, 99%, whatever the percentage is, a high percentage of doctors and trans people would argue that all we would want is for children under the age of, certain consent lines, other than adults, full adults, be given puberty blockers, which are reversible drugs that actually prevent irreversible changes, actually prevent possible irreversible harm to trans kids, because if a trans kid goes through natal puberty, as I know very well from my own experience, it can be a very horrific thing. It can be a very horrific experience for a kid who is trans and learns that that is not how their body is aligned. So puberty blockers just allow a safe way for people to go through that. And to have time to get to a consenting age. No one is asking for trans kids to be given surgeries like breast augmentation, breast reduction, vaginoplasties. No one's asking for that until kids reach a certain age where they are able to consent legally. Which has been determined in numerous different states and numerous different areas. People can debate the exact line of legal age of consent for those surgeries. But generally we say not until they're older. So this whole idea of vilifying the trans community for asking for these surgeries for children is not only horrific, but wrong. Just abjectly, factually wrong. Does not happen. So that's sort of the permeating narrative around trans people right now, that trans people are child abusers for trying to push these things on kids, which again, factually wrong and just also harmful to kids, just in general, who are now being vilified for trying to seek these things like puberty blockers, which should be safely and readily available and done with the supervision of doctors and therapists, and done through a safe treatment of having conversations with the parents, with the doctors, with everyone involved to make sure that it is safe to do these things. The other day, I believe the Texas Attorney General, I forget his name off the top of my head, Texas Attorney General basically put out an opinion, quite literally just an opinion, that he thought that that what we were just talking about constitutes child abuse. That people are trying to push, the trans-affirming surgeries on kids, and that is child abuse. From there, Governor Greg Abbott followed up on that, released an order that basically says, I hereby direct your agencies to conduct he's asking the Texas Department of Family Protective Surgeries to conduct a prompt and thorough investigation of any reported instances of these abusive procedures in the state of Texas, which I doubt he will find. But basically he's using this to put that out there. And again, even in the documentation, he calls them sex change procedures. If you're talking about sex change procedures, which by the way, no one uses that term anymore, it's gender confirmation surgeries. Sex change is such an outdated term. But again, no one is asking for anyone to have sex change procedures on children. Literally just puberty blockers, or again, hormones possibly once they're at an age of consent in order to do that. What is even more horrifying is that right here it says, the Texas law also imposes a duty on the Department of Family and Protective Services to investigate the parents of a child who is subjected to these abusive gender transition procedures, and on other state agencies to investigate licensed facilities where procedures may occur. And it also, I believe, let me just quick state, believe there's actually a call for, he also instructed all teachers, doctors, and caregivers to begin reporting any trans students they see. Which is, to me, that is absolutely the most horrifying part of all of this. I mean, obviously the overall vilification of trans affirming care as child abuse is abjectly horrifying. But the fact that there's a demand for a duty to report trans children that they see, not only does that otherize and vilify trans kids, with people now looking at them and judging them and seeing them as victims, as something other, pitiable, reinforcing this and something like maybe harmed and things like that, as it reinforces, again, not to belittle anyone who suffered trauma as a kid, but it also reinforces this idea of of otherizing trans kids, which also then goes to reinforcing, the mental health harm done to children, which can directly lead to increased rates of suicidality and depressive thoughts in children, which we already see is at higher rates for trans people because, again, how they are viewed and otherized by society. It is abjectly horrifying to do that to the kids. On top of that, to then report their parents for being child abusers and have them, even if they're found to be fine, which they almost certainly will be, the parents now face the stigma of having been accused of child abuse. They now have to deal with being investigated, which will not only, probably cause harm to their reputations, both within their work, their jobs, their communities, but they now have to take off time and deal with that. So there's an also direct financial harm done to them that they now have to worry about this, that they have to worry about this as a financial harm to them. They also have to worry about it as a mental health harm to themselves and their child that they now have to go through. And there's also a very real risk on top of that because of the way that these Texas, lawmakers are vilifying these people, that because of the way they vilify things, that they will take these kids away from their parents for being affirming to their kids, for actually doing the correct thing and carrying them and caring for their child. That is what is absolutely horrifying in this situation to me. The denial of trans affirming care and all that other stuff is also horrifying, but it is not necessarily atypical for what these groups are. What is atypical, what is taking the next step, I guess is the best way to put it, in horrifying abuse. It's absolutely horrible. So I just wanted to talk about that because I wanted to bring it to people's attention if they have not heard about that. I think it is something that we all need to be pushing back against. It's also, by the way, reflective of the same self-report idea that is being utilized by the recent anti-abortion bill that Texas passed. The recent anti-abortion bill from Texas, as many of you probably know, as people have talked about it ad nauseum, is also horrific in that it weaponizes people being able to report anyone who may have gotten an abortion in order to sue them. Like, anyone can sue someone that they think may have gotten an abortion in order to make it even harder, and again, make it even easier for people who want to seek that health care to be harmed, attacked, and abused, and they don't even, and again, also be financially hurt and harmed. Whereas someone who reports them can get a bunch of ways to get their money back if they fail in their legal services. Anyone who is accused of these things, they have to go through this legal sort of whole rigmarole, and even if they're found not guilty, they have to pay for these legal services that they now cannot get repaid for. So absolutely horrifying. It's the same weaponization that Texas is using there. Obviously the abortion bill is much more directly encouraging of that because it sort of allows anybody to do that, as opposed to Greg Abbott sort of just saying doctors, teachers, that sort of thing, but it's still the same sort of tactic. Yeah, exactly. And Jess Carowin, also a really great point that Vera made, that these investigations will take away funds from real abuse cases, putting all Texas kids at risk. Exactly, Carowin. This sort of how transphobia also harms even more vulnerable people that aren't even the direct target of it, is also the case. It just showcases how these tactics are constantly hurting everybody, not just those who it directly targets, but constantly hurts the many people in the offshoot, in the afterblow of it. But Florida, I'm just going to read this just so people are aware of it, and then I'm going to get to the super chats and we'll talk about more fun things. But I'll just read this out. This is from NPR. Florida House passes controversial measure dubbed the Don't Say Gay bill by critics. Florida's House of Representatives passed a controversial bill on Thursday limiting when and how teachers and school staff can discuss gender and sexual orientation in the classroom. So opponents, many of whom have taken to calling the measure Don't Say Gay bill, say that it will make life harder for LGBT youth who are already face a higher rate of bullying and higher risk of suicide than their straight cisgender peers. It aims to have schools teach gender and sexuality at a quote appropriate age and keeps parents informed of what's happening in the classroom. Again, it goes to the whole idea that somehow sexuality is somehow adult. We can have children's books and things where, a guy and a girl end up together. The princess marries the prince and they kiss and all that. And yet, two boys, two girls doing the exact same thing in a non-sexual context is deemed as adult and inappropriate and sexualizing children. It's going back to this same exact targeted attack on educational institutions in this country, going right down to this whole, critical race theory idea, the sort of weaponization of critical race theory, which not being taught in schools, it's a college level theory, but using that to sort of instill a fear-mongering campaign in their base in order to whip up people to show up to vote for Republicans in the right way. And while Florida, I will say this, while Florida's Don't Say Gay bill is the most directly targeted at LGBTQ issues, this is not just a Florida problem, but one that we are seeing in many red states around the country doing very similar things. For example, there is a bill, I forget which state it was, I'll have to look it up, and I apologize that I don't have it right on hand, but there is a bill that was passed that basically stated that, like, you can't teach kids that something that would go against their, like, parents' religious beliefs, or it would make them feel uncomfortable in the classroom. I think there's like numerous bills that say those sort of things, but those are so nebulous that it's very unclear what they mean, and it's not just there. And it's the number one, the nebulousness of the wording is obviously there to allow bigots and lawmakers and politicians to have a wide net in order to attack people talking about LGBTQ issues, trans issues, racial issues in educational context. But also, it's meant to have a chilling effect on the teachers themselves talking about anything too, because because they don't know exactly what they can or cannot say, because there's no clear established rules. Most teachers will just stop saying anything. And I as much as, like, I love the heroic teacher, teachers want to have a safe job, and teachers have continually fight these fights over and over and over and over again, and it just gets depressing. It's why we're seeing a loss of teachers entering into people entering into the teaching field in general. Like, there's been, I believe there's been several studies that show that there's just less teachers because teachers are leaving the job, and less people are going into it because of all the crap that people have been saying. And also, yes, the banned books too, with recently the mouse controversy, which was done for, like, sexual reasons, like, oh, you get to see a naked mouse, when really it's like banning necessary discussions of the Holocaust to kids. And all of this goes to show that, like, it all goes to say, like, kids are able to handle this stuff. What is more harming to children is to not talk about these things and leave them going into the real world, into adult life, with having no context for them. And that's where these things where misinformation gets spread continues and gets emboldened. I mean, why we see the trans community constantly attacked, why I constantly see a lot of the work that I do when I make videos. Most of you, all of you, my regular audience, are with me on the ride. You're already here. You already know a lot about trans issues. You've been educated in trans issues, not just by me, but by other places. You're maybe trans yourself and maybe very aware of them and done the research and things like that. Or you're learning through me or other people that you've encountered. That's, I feel like, the large majority of my audience, just because that's the audience that I've built. But whenever I make a video about Matt Walsh, for example, I see a lot of influx of people who come to that video not even out of hatred, but they start to spread this they start to spout and say the same misinformation. I get so many comments from people being like, "You're a child abuser. You're doing this. Why do you say that? Why do you say, like, some silly ones, like why do you think it's okay to dox and harass J.K. Rowling?" Which is something that I've repeatedly stated that I do not think is okay. But again, this misinformation gets spread because people are not educated on these issues, are not exposed to these issues, and so people in power can take advantage of these gaps in information in order to whip up their base into anger and vitriol in order to spread more harm. That's the whole thing that this does. Not only does this campaign of vilifying education and education about these issues done to embolden the people in power right now, not only does like saying critical race theory is trying to indoctrinate your children in school systems get people to show up to the voting booth right now, it creates a culture where children are not exposed to these issues, are not talking about these issues, and unfortunately, when they grow up, then when they enter into a world that does have trans people in it, that does have LGBTQ people in it, that does have people of color in it, that they are not able to articulate it, understand it, to have a critical eye to the way to handle these topics, have a mature way to handle these topics. And then it just perpetuates the same cycle because those situations that anxiety that it causes in people, because it causes anxiety, allows people to seek out answers, and usually the quickest, easiest answers are the ones being offered by those in power in order to hold on to their own power, which is usually typically spreading more information and fear-mongering. It's a vicious cycle that constantly ends up not only harming everybody, as we've talked about already several times throughout the stream, in both runoff ways, but it directly harms the most vulnerable. It directly harms trans kids. It directly harms women, cisgender or trans, non-binary people, people of color. It continually targets those people, but it not only just doesn't harm them, it harms everyone, all people. Every single one is hurt by these things. It just directly targets and hurts, and immediately hurts those most vulnerable first. And those who I think about, those are the people who I think about right now. Those are the people who are in my heart right now. Might cry a little bit about it, especially the trans kids and LGBTQ kids, both in Texas and Florida, and other places. It eats me up inside. And I will say this, and this is the last thing that I'll add on this, and then I promise you we'll get to more fun stuff. And I'm sorry that this stream has become a me yelling session. I didn't realize how much I wanted to talk about it until I just got into it. This is a personal part of this. This is by no means the most important thing. As just speaking for my own self. You know, as I spoke about in a video a while ago about burnout, the other side effect goal of this is to constantly burn out the people trying to do the work to show up to try to fight these battles, to fight for these kids, to fight for pushing back against misinformation. It is something that I feel very, very deeply a lot as a YouTuber who wishes to talk about these things. You know, I'm currently working right now on a video, my next section Star Trek video, I'm doing a whole video about talking about masculinity within James Gunn's movies. I'm very excited and encouraged about those projects. Those are projects that inspire me. There are projects that make me feel fulfilled. There are projects that make me feel good about my use of creativity and my creative outlet. But this whole day I have felt horrible. Because I'm like, I am currently spending my energy right now writing a video about silly, nerdy comic book movies. And I should be using my energy to make a video about the problems going on in Texas. And I know that I probably should. You know? Use my energy there. But I don't have the ability to constantly be addressing these issues every single day because they come up every single day. I see it every single day. You know, I get people asking me every single day, can you address Texas? Can you address, the Don't Say Gay bills? Can you address the Adele controversy? Can you address, like, all these things? And I want to. Believe me, I want to. Especially my neurodiverse brain makes me like, I need to know everything and talk about everything and share every opinion that I have. You know? It especially targets people on the autism spectrum because we want to, like, we can't filter very well, and that's a me thing. It's hard for me to filter out stuff. I want to share every single piece of myself, and that's the goal, not just for autistic folks, but for many people who want to show this work. Constantly wear people down, constantly throw new issues, new pieces of information. Like once one piece of misinformation gets answered and put out there and mostly responded to, then they create a new one, and then that's the one we have to now respond to as well. It is hard. It is hard to balance the desire to feed my own self, my own soul with something creative, positive, and kind. And also wanting to do the work of showing up to talk about the issues that are directly pertinent to those who are being harmed right now, like the Texas bill. I know it's important to take care of myself first so that I can show up when I can. If I burn myself out, then I won't be able to show up down the line. And there are people fighting right now about the Texas ban and Texas stuff and the Florida stuff, and then I can show up to the next one, or I can show up when I can, give the energy that I can, do what I can. But it's also important for me to do the silly superhero stuff and the Star Trek stuff, which is also in its own way, probably less directly, but its own way I still think is important to a degree. Yeah. So it's tough. Anywho, thank you so much. And I will say this. I'm going to get to the super chats because I know I missed a whole bunch. And I know I missed a whole bunch of the chat. Thank you for this. Thank you for allowing me this moment and this platform and to discuss this. And I already feel better talking to all of you. And I'll end this rant on this thought. That's why things like this, this community that we have right here, and all communities that we find ourselves in that build up each other, care for each other, recognize each other's differences, and yet respect the differences, take delight in differences. That's why they're so important. To have community like this. We care for each other, we think about each other, we build each other up, we hold on to each other, we cherish each other. And so I thank you for being there for me. And I thank you for being there for each other. And I appreciate all of you with all of my heart. So, mwah.